Hey guys, so what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, I thought we'd continue our discussions on AOS3 and have a little bit of a look at what the potential meta might be, or just some early thoughts on, I guess, what Games Workshop's kind of pushing for, but what will probably end up happening. Just for more, I suppose, competitive play, or using, the General's Handbook and the missions that are in that, and the point scoring and so on. There's definitely going to be a lot of mix up and a lot of, I guess, new ways to play the game, I suppose. But there's also some stuff in here that I think probably may end up being in reverse, and that's namely this sort of monster meta, or the sort of push on monsters. I think might be a bit of a trap, for your scoring and so on. So hero monsters definitely are obviously going to be really, really good, but your standard monsters, I feel like, might actually be a bit of a trap, or a bit of a hindrance to you in terms of scoring, because from what we've seen, the leaks and stuff that we've seen, that you can go and search that if you want to find that stuff, but you're getting extra points for monsters doing stuff like scoring and so on, but also you're losing points if they die and that sort of thing as well. So there's kind of like, that you're sort of giving up points, because this new edition is kind of working a little bit like 40k, and in 40k, if you spam tanks or big units, that sort of thing, you're giving your opponent victory points, basically, because in a 5-turn game, you're going to lose most of that stuff, and so you're giving up a certain number of points. But what you're banking on is that you're going to do more points than your opponent, and you'll make up the difference. And that's what's happening here. If you're taking an army that's got a lot of monsters in it, for instance, like whatever it is, the Gristlegore one, the Flesh Eater Courts list, where you've got all the Terrorgeists and so on. Well, if they're battle line, you get additional points for killing. If other monsters kill battle line, I think you get points. So, but you're also getting the points for killing a monster. So you could be potentially giving up multiple points per Terrorgeist if you were taking that kind of list. Or, in Soulblight, they've got one as well for the Vengorian one. There's a bunch of armies that have this type of thing, and you could be potentially losing quite a few points, unless there's something that stipulates you get one or the other. But even still, like if you've got, let's say, 3 big monsters, even if they're hero monsters in your army, well, you're going to be potentially giving up 3 points, or maybe even more, depending on what the points end up being, once we see the real thing in a couple of weeks. But you're still down points, and which means you're going to have to make it up somewhere. So there are ways to do that with your monsters, but then you're putting them into a precarious position where they're probably going to die, and most things do. Like, again, the Flesh Eater Courts example, your Ghoul King on Terrorgeist is awesome. This is a hero monster now, but they always die by the end of the game, and a lot of these types of hero monsters don't last the whole length. There are some standout ones that do, and ones that will last the whole game, and those will be the big winners. And I think that comes back to that point a lot of people have been talking about, is that the good armies are getting better in AOS3, and the bad armies are just getting pushed up more into the middle, but they're still overall worse than those top sort of 6 armies, and the hero monsters in those top 6 armies are just getting better. Even if they've been pointed at a higher points cost, it doesn't really matter. They're still their output is still much better than anything else that you can get in the other armies. And so, especially armies like a Flesh Eater Courts army, which is more of a glass cannon, you're not expecting them to live. Or things like, lots of the greenskin armies, they're there to do a job, but they're also there to die, and that's bad. If then you're losing those points, you're giving it up, and so you're hoping that you'll score more than your opponent does. And so in 40k, you're looking at, when you're building lists, at least for competitive stuff generally, you're having to look at those secondaries and those kinds of ways of point scoring on you to mitigate a lot of that, so that your opponent doesn't have a lot of choices in those secondaries to get points on you. And that's kind of what you generally do to sort of make sure that you're not just giving up stuff. And so even though Games Workshop wants this to be a monster meta, I actually think anti-monster meta is what it's going to be. And there are a lot of units coming that are designed to hunt and kill monsters, namely in the Stormcast range, and also a lot of ways to to get you point scoring without being a monster, namely this thing here, the metamorphosis. So that's going to turn your hero into a monster for that phase or that turn, that until the next hero phase. So you could then score points like a monster and get that buff. So for instance, I think there's one for scoring a point for killing a battle line unit. Well, for instance, in Druster over here, you could turn her into a monster, and she would easily be able to kill a battle line unit like an MSU, because this meta is moving towards MSU or smaller units. She could probably wipe out a small unit and gain you the points for that turn. Something like that. Maybe if she can't take it, then whatever other, there's a million other heroes that you could throw this spell onto to score those points for that turn, or take an objective as a monster, and so on and so on. So I think that even though they're pushing for that monster meta, I think it's going to be anti-monster meta that's really going to trump it, because then you're not giving up points. Things that aren't monsters that can still do damage like monsters, or heroic monsters that or heroes that act like that, like this type of character that's pretty monstrous, but maybe does. I don't think she has the keyword for monster, so things like that are going to be able to do enough damage but not give away points, and that's really what you're going to be looking at, I think. For quite a lot of the meta, I don't really see armies like that Grizzlegore thing where you've got tons of Terrorgeists on the board a really viable way to win tournaments or to play more competitively, because you're just giving up too many points. I don't think those kinds of lists are going to last long in this current. Like, this is my prediction anyway. I might be wrong, but I feel like you're probably going to be giving up, like, let's say it's 1 point per killing a monster, right? Well, and you've got 3 in your list. Well, that's 3 points you're giving up, right off the bat. Now, when the game's tight, 3 points is a big deal. So, I think the total points in this game now is going to be like 28 points. So if that's true, then the average for wins is probably going to be somewhere between 24 and 26 points. And if you're getting a close game, that 3 point differential is probably going to, be the difference between you winning and losing. And so there are things to consider. Now, obviously, not every game of tabletop miniatures is about winning, but we're just talking here, I guess, in terms of the competitive nature of things. And even if you're playing a competitive casual game, and you want that to be fun and close, you've still got to pay attention to how many of these type of units you've got, because you're going to make it a less close game by doing that, you know what I mean? Because you're giving your opponent already a bunch of points that they're definitely going to get, because, as I said, not all of these monsters are going to survive. They're normally there to do a job, do the damage, and then they die. And even most hero monsters, even though I think they'll be really good for this edition, are still kind of, not all of them are going to be that great, and they're going to be giving away points. I'd be much rather looking at units that can do that kind of monstrous damage or heroic actions, but without giving up that point. So yeah, they're just some early thoughts that I've got on that. Obviously, we'll see what happens in the future with the various scenarios and what they offer as well in terms of any additional objectives that like point scoring that they offer per battle plan, I suppose. But overall, I think that, monsters in general are going to be a bit of a trap, and I think teching into that is probably going to put you at a disadvantage in some cases. Obviously, some armies, let's say like the Sons of Behemoth, which are like, all the giants, they're looking pretty good for AOS3, and, they're pretty tough to kill, and unless you're really smart, they're going to be hard to contend with initially, and so they'll probably see a bit of a spike early on. But I think even that army will eventually get reined in by players once they realize how to mitigate that and how to get those points off them, because their whole army is basically giving up. Let's say you've got 4 or 5 of these units. I mean, if you can kill even half of them, 3 of them, that's 3 points to you over them before they've even begun. And so I think there'll be ways to get over those kind of armies eventually as the edition rolls on, and as we know, this is looking like a yearly thing. So obviously this monster meta won't last. It'll only be around for a while, and depending on when they release these, if they're going mid-year to mid-year, then I guess we've got a full year of this. But if this was like, let's say, a late release or something, and they want to release a new one a bit earlier in the year, then this may not even be around for a full 12 months. This might actually be a little bit shorter. I don't know what the release schedule is, but if it is and releasing earlier in the year, then we won't even see this meta for that long. So I don't think you want to rush out, and basically what I'm saying is don't rush out and buy a bunch of monsters because you think that's going to be awesome. I'd say just keep building like nice balanced lists with all the different units that you need and how you want to play, and basically playing the mission. That's what pretty much how 40k is these days. Even though they were saying, vehicles are going to be great and all that kind of stuff, it's still basically an infantry based game mostly. And strong, efficient infantry units generally do very well, and you're always playing to the mission, right? So that's sort of how it works in 40k, and I think AOS, with the way that they're changing things and the way that you're, with your core battalions and then your battle plans and your secondaries and so on, which are really important. That's like a huge part of the points that you're scoring, not just the primary stuff, which is hold 1, hold 2, hold more than your opponent. You're going to be scoring most of your points in those secondaries each round, and being very careful because I think you're choosing those, aren't you? Like each round, they're going to change. So it's a little bit different to 40k, but you've got to be doing it in a very precise order in order to get those points. And so that's that minutia, that granularity, I suppose, they're looking to get into the game, and that's going to require you to have a different kind of composition of army. You can't just have a couple of units. You're going to have some smaller units, MSU style stuff, enough in there to be able to do those different jobs in order to score your maximum points. I think that'll be difficult in some armies that don't have enough in there, or have too many big monsters that don't have enough units there to actually achieve all those different goals that you're going to need to do. And so armies that have a lot of variety of units, they're just getting better, and that's pretty much all those, like most of the Elven armies, right? They've all got that really good high flexibility, high movement. We see it in 40k, Drakari, great. Even though they've got like a pretty busted codex, we see the core structure of that style of gameplay being very, very potent, fast moving, able to get around. Yes, you can get rid of them when they're in combat, but they've already achieved their objective. They've gotten the points on the board, and it's very hard to catch up. And all those kinds of really flexible armies do quite well in 40k. And here we're seeing it again in AOS. The armies to look out for, things like Lumineth and all that kind of stuff, that have those units that can really play the board, moving very fast. So that's why I said in my previous one that, Flesh Eater Courts are looking pretty good. Just from a core structure point of view, they're going to be a very, very... There's a lot of potential there to be a very strong army for AOS3, depending on how their new book goes and if they can add more units and sort of, if they double the number of units for that army, I think that'll be a really, really great one to play with, because especially the Blisterkin sub-faction, because you've got that extra movement. It's generating CP for you from the artifact or whatever it is, or the command ability, whatever, which I think it's the artifact they've got. And then obviously their throne is really good for throwing out command abilities and that sort of thing. So they've got some really good basic tech in there to make that army really, really great for AOS3 for death players. And there are other armies as well that have this type of thing where they've got CP generation, these types of things already inbuilt into the army, and a lot of good hero monsters and basically fast-moving basic troops, so a lot of flexibility. And the ones that have the most, I think, are going to do really well in this edition, because then you've got that ability to change as the meta changes, and you won't have to just jump faction all the time and meta chase. You'll be able to stick with one army that has a lot in it. So things like Lumineth, and even Daughters of Cain, they're mostly powerful because of a certain large serpent lady, but and those bow snakes. But there are armies out there that do have those different choices, and I think the one that's going to be coming that will be the one to look out for will be Stormcast. As I've said before, I think they're going to be the Space Marines of the fantasy range, and they're going to be very efficient, and you can have a lot of good units. They're going to work well in MSU style meta. They're going to be able to score your points well. You won't need very many to do that with. They'll be resilient, tough, and you'll have all the shooting necessary to work against big monsters. And you have these types of characters with wings that fly around that sort of circumvent some of that meta. And that's the same with a lot of the Elven armies. They have these type of units too, right? So those kinds of armies, I think, are pretty high on the list to be working very well in this new game. But anyway, there's some initial short thoughts I've got. I don't want to rant on about it all day, but it's been interesting looking at the way the game is changing and the competitive nature of it. And I certainly love the way it's going. I think because I really enjoy 40k. I think it's it's a really good game system, and I've enjoyed getting back into it. And getting into this feels like it's got that layered level of tactics now. It feels like I understand it better because of the way they're changing it. I've talked about that before. Like the way you're writing your list is a lot more understandable. The way the secondaries are, and the various missions and everything, and everything that you're trying to take, I feel like it's working. My only gripe, I guess, which I would have loved to have seen, is the only thing I don't like about AOS really is the fact that there's no individual points cost for models, so you can't take odd size units or anything. I really, really wish that wasn't the case for AOS. That's pretty much the only thing about the game that I don't particularly like, is having to take everything in these grouped numbers, because sometimes you're just out by a certain number of points, or you want to just tweak something just enough to get the balance right. And that's something that 40k still has, although I know it's probably going to go eventually. We're already seeing units that come in a set number, and that's probably only going to increase as time goes on. If AOS is successful with this idea, then they're just going to go for that. And I suppose it makes sense, because it means the box you buy is the unit, and then you just buy another one if you want another, and so on. And I can see that going to 40k as well. That'll be a big shame, because it just adds that little bit extra, so you can just manipulate something, because a lot of the points in AOS3 don't really quite add up to a decent 2,000 point. It either is just on, or you're short by like 40, 50 points, and you can't buy anything for that except maybe a cheap endless spell. And if your army's not teched into wizards, it's kind of like a waste, or you get a triumph or whatever. But I just feel like, but then if you could just do like, instead of 3, 4 of something, or if you have to have 6, just drop that by 1 and then take 1 of something else, that unit becomes way more efficient and you get a much better balance. I've said this before, a lot of those units that come in 3s, their optimal size is probably 4 or 5, not 6. And especially now with coherency, that is definitely the case, where you want 4 or 5, not 3 or 6. So that's my only downer on this whole game, is that it's moving away from being able to grab those individual things at that smaller points cost, because that's how you really maximize your total points values that you have over your whole army, is by manipulating those couple of models around. And the fact that you don't have that anymore in AOS, kind of sucks. Coming from an old school player from back in the day from Warhammer, that was one of those fun bits about tweaking the list in that final stage when you're building your list, is just manipulating those few models around to figure out exactly the perfect balance of units. And I always enjoyed that, but you can't do that in AOS. You can do that to some extent, but not a great deal. You still got it in 40k, so that's nice. But yeah, I feel like 40k will lose that eventually. Anyway, we're going a bit off topic here, but I think that there's definitely, in terms of AOS 3, you want to watch out for this monster thing, because I think it's a trap. I don't think it's going to be as you're not going to want to tech into that as heavily as what you might think you do. Possibly, as I said, the hero monsters for certain ones, definitely. But yeah, if your army has other options that don't give up points and still give you strong units that are going to achieve those secondary objectives and so on in your primaries, then I would probably go them over a heavy monster build. But that, I guess most people that are competitive already kind of understand this. But, it might be different. Who knows? But they're the feelings that I've got on it anyway. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope I haven't ranted on too long. Hopefully some of you are still listening. Thank you very much. And, we'll see what happens in the future. But, please hit that like button, subscribe button. It really helps me out. And I guess I'll catch you on the next one.